Hi, this is Mike Kent, and in this video I'm going to show you how to create a simple program which covers most of the introductory concepts that you typically see in the first chapter of a Visual Basic book. So first thing I need to do is run Visual Studio. I'm going to go to Start Menu, All Programs, and you see right here I got Visual Studio 2013, and I'm going to launch VS Express, Visual Studio Express 2013 for the desktop. Now the first time you may run it, it may ask you what's your default environment. You want to pick Visual Basic as your choice. So I can either here on the start page say New Project, or if the start page is closed and I've just have blank right here, I can go to File, New Project, and I want to create a Visual Basic project for Windows, and I want to do a Windows Form application. Now, before I hit OK, you'll see Visual Studio's decided to call my project Windows Application 1. If I create another one, it'd be Windows Application 2. I want to give my project a better name, so I'm going to name it Lab 1. Does that make more sense? Now, where is it going to put my project? It's going to put it in My Documents, underneath My User, and under Visual Studio 2013 Projects. So right now I'm going to hit OK, and it's going to create a blank project. Now, the first time you come into Visual Studio, it will probably not load this fast, and creating a project will not be this fast. Since I've been in Visual Studio today, opening it and closing it, it opens up quite fast. Here you see I have a blank project. And the first time you come into Visual Studio, it'll look like this. You'll have your form. Over in your Solution Explorer, you'll see Solution Lab 1, Project Settings, Form1.vb. If for some reason your form's not popping up, like, let me close this on purpose. I can double click here to bring it back up. Now the other thing you're going to want to do when you have your form up is come over to the toolbox and pin the toolbox up. So I'm going to create just a little basic program here. Pardon the pun. I'm going to put a couple command buttons on the form. You see right here. Now the way you can put command buttons on the form is either by double clicking, and then you can drag them around, or you can click on it once and rubber band a button out. So now you can see I got two buttons. Either way works. I usually just double click and put, I'll sit there and go, oh, I need 3 buttons. I'll double click twice on, or 3 times on the button control. And I say, oh, I need 3 text boxes, so I'll double click on the text boxes 3 times. But what I'm going to do now is I'm also going to add a label. So I'll click once and say, I want this label to be nice and big. Hey, it didn't make it big. It went back to this size. And that's because there's a property of the label control that says only make the label as big as what's inside of it. So right now, it contains the text Label 1, so that's how big it is. So what I have to do is click on the label and come over to my Properties window, and I'm looking for a property called Auto Size. See how that's set to true? I want to change that to false. Now you can either change it to false by double clicking here, or you can hit your drop down and choose false. Now as soon as I do that, do you see how the size of the label changed? Now another thing I like to do on my labels is go to Border Style and say Fixed 3D. So that kind of gives you a 3D effect on the label. You don't have to do that. Now you see in the label it says Label 1, and that's because when Visual Studio, Visual Basic created the label, it automatically put in the text property Label 1. If I write Bubba right now, then you'll see what's in the label is Bubba. Now the name of this label, if I come on up to the name property, is also Label 1, and that's not a very good name, because if we had 5 labels on our form, if one label is supposed to hold tax and one label is supposed to hold the grand total, calling it Label 1, Label 2, Label 3, Label 4, Label 5 is just not a very good naming scheme. So I am going to call this label Message Label. Now, and pardon my typos, when you create the name property for control, you don't ever put any spaces in it. So now you see it's called Message Label. Now, if I look at my button right here, button 1, you'll see it's called button 1. That's not a very good name. Let's call it push me button. And then this button right here is going to be exit button. Now, when I changed the name property, you noticed the text that is on the buttons did not change because that is a different property. That's the text property. So I'm going to go to the text property of button 1 and say push me. Now for text, that's fine. You can put spaces in it to make it readable. But for the name of your controls that you're going to use in your Visual Basic Code, there can be no spaces. And this button is going to say exit. So now you can see I've got my form. It's got a label that has in its text property Bubba. I have a push me button and an exit button. Now I can run the program right now. It's not going to do much because I have not written any Visual Basic code behind these buttons. So let's hit start. My window pops up. I can hit the push me button. I can hit the exit button. Nothing happens. I can hit maximize. I can hit restore. I can drag the window away around, and I can hit close. So what I want to do now is I want to write some code so that when they click on push me, it's going to say hello world in this label. So quickest way to get to the code window is to double click on the button that you want to write the code for. So I'm going to double click on push me, and see right now we have private sub push me button click in sub. So anything inside this sub, anything I write here is the code that's going to be run, but we got to write Visual Basic code. So what was the name of that label? It was message label. So MES. Hey, look at that. It's starting to bring it in. It's starting to bring up everything that begins with message, and there's message label. So I can either type it all out or I can double click on it. So message label dot text, because I'm going to change the text property, equals double quote hello world. Now let me explain what's going on here. I'm saying take the message hello world, which is a string, which I have to begin with a double quote and end with a double quote to tell Visual Basic where it starts and where it ends. Take that hello world string, assign it, that's what the equal means, to the text property of message label. That means put hello world into the text property of message label. So when they click the button, it's going to change what's in the label to hello world. Now I'm going to close my code window. The other thing we want to do is make the exit program, so exit button, so it actually closes the program. So if I go to here, the code I have to write here is me dot close. Now once you've typed enough to make it the only choice, you can hit spacebar, and there it is. It completed it for me. So me dot close. So let's go back and run my program again. So I'll hit start, and now if I hit push me, it says hello world, and if I hit exit, it exits the program. Isn't that exciting? Well, not really, because it's the first program and it doesn't do very much. Now, typically, first chapter, you'll probably do some extra buttons. You might do a print preview and print button so you can send your window to the printer. It just depends on your book. That is how you create a program. Let's review a little bit. First thing you want to do is add your controls to the form from the toolbox. The second thing you want to do is go to each and every control and change it to the proper name property. Get that done before you try to write any code. Once you've got them all renamed, then you can double click on your command buttons and write your Visual Basic code. Now we need to test it, but one thing you always want to do as you're working on these projects is hit your save all early and often. So I'm going to hit save all. It's going to save my project, and then I can run it. I can test it to see how it's working. Hey, it looks like it worked. Now if I close Visual Studio, I'm going to hit my close button here. Let's go find that project so I can reopen it. So I'm going to open up Windows Explorer, I'm going to go to My Documents. I'm going to go to Visual Studio 2013. Can you tell I've been teaching Visual Basic for a while? Visual Studio 2005, 8, 10. Anyway, I want to go to 13. Then I'm going to go to Projects. Oh, look, there's Lab 1. That's what I named it. So this folder, everything in this folder is my project. I'm going to double click on Lab 1. And inside of it, you see the Microsoft Visual Studio Solution. So I can double click on this to reopen my project. And there it is. I'm going to close it again though. I want to talk a little bit more about this project file. I'm going to go back to my project folder. There's Lab 1. Now if I need to move Lab 1 to my memory stick, I can right click and say send to, and then send it to whichever disk drive I need to send it to. Or I can just right click and say copy. Now say I want to put it in this 1331 folder here instead. So now I can say paste. So now I have moved my project to a different folder or to a different disk drive. It's still in projects because I did a copy. So anytime you need to move your project around, you need to get out of Visual Studio and copy it. Do not do save as. If you do save as, you're going to take this one little part of your program, like form1.vb, and you're going to save it somewhere else. The rest of your project's still going to be here. You're going to break your project when you try to turn it into me. So only use the save as, exit out of Visual Studio, copy this folder. In fact, when you go to turn this folder into me, when you go to turn Lab 1 into me to grade, you're going to right click on it and say send to compressed file. Now you see I've zipped up the entire project. That's what you're going to turn into me. So that is how to create a program, and I've introduced to you some introductory controls. Jump back in here and look at it. I've introduced to you the command button, the label, and the two properties that we're going to use the most are the name property. That's what we're going to name it so we can use it in our programming code. And the text property is what shows up on that control. So thanks a lot. Keep working. As always, contact me if you need help.